Hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Claude. Thank you so much for coming to Bard Graduate Center. My name is Andrew Kircher. I'm the Director of Public Humanities and Research here at BGC. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to one of our last Wednesdays at BGC. So if you don't know, every Wednesday night at 6 p.m., except next week because there's a holiday, we come here to learn together, to explore together. And tonight, so one of the things that's so special about BGC and our great commitment to studying human history through design and objects is that we have down the street, if you haven't been before, an absolute jewel of a gallery. And this is sort of a laboratory where the thoughts and ideas that are explored here in the abstract are put into practice. And we have right now an exhibition that is one of the most beautiful you'll see, which is an exhibition on lace. And Michelle Major and Emma Cormack, two of the curators, are here tonight. Please join me in thanking them for their amazing work. And so we try and have moments where we can take that exhibition or any exhibitions here as points of departure. And when I started here, I'm only a year into this job. We were planning events, and it seemed impossible that we would have an exhibition on lace and not talk about Justice Ginsburg. And I instantly remembered one of my greatest memories from my years working at the Public Theater downtown was working with the company Elevator Repair Service. And they made a remarkable production called Arguendo, among many others. If you saw Gatz or most recently Baldwin and Buckley, they're a renowned company. But there was a small coda, a scene featuring Justice Ginsburg that stayed with me. And so we're very lucky tonight that not only will we get a chance to see that scene re-performed for us, or for me, for the rest of you maybe, performed for the first time, and then after that, we will have a conversation with Vanessa Friedman from the New York Times and Elena Kanagy-Loux, who is a commissioned lace maker in our exhibition and also our partner with the Brooklyn Lace Guild in the Lacemaker Studio, an interactive space we have in our gallery. And that conversation will be an opportunity for us to explore the significance of these amazing lace collars that define Justice Ginsburg. But tonight, to begin, I'm going to turn over to the artistic director of Elevator Repair Service, John Collins, who will set up the production of Arguendo and his company. John.
Thank you, Andrew. It is really great to be a part of this. We got a chance to see the exhibition a few days ago, and it is beautiful and it's fascinating. So please do check it out. I feel like I learned a ton, even in a whirlwind tour that we got. So I want to tell you a little bit about our company and why we're here. In case you're, I'm going to open up my speech here so I don't forget anything. So Elevator Repair Service, I'm going to just footnote that I'll tell the story of that ridiculous name for a theater company maybe later. And if I don't, you can find me afterwards and I'll tell you why we named it that. The company was formed in 1991 by me and basically a group of my friends. And we were very young, very inexperienced theater people, but we had two good impulses, I think, when we started the company that turned into two good ideas about how to make work. One was that we just wanted to work as an ensemble. We wanted to create theater as a group. This was what theater had always been to me growing up, was a great social experience. So we wanted to make theater as an ensemble and not just as single authors and single directors. We also wanted to make work that was based on anything but a play. Our work was about found text. Basically, it was about the idea that you could take anything and make it into a piece of theater. And that was what excited us as young people back then, 30 years ago. And that sort of led us to a slightly more sophisticated notion of making theater out of problem solving, of finding things that we could research, like some idea of a thing we could put on stage that would give us a problem to solve, give us a reason to work together to do research to try to figure out what we were doing. And so that was really why I got into directing, even as a college student. I loved the idea that in a theatrical rehearsal process, you could have some kind of beginning idea, and then you start to work on it, and you have some accidents and some unexpected discoveries, and you could follow those. You could make a piece of work out of the things that you just discovered in rehearsal with your collaborators. So over the years, Elevator Repair Service developed a way of sort of inventing an idea that would get us going, and then we would become a genuinely experimental theater company in the sense that we would propose an idea, try it, let it fail, see what else it led us to, and that was kind of the ethos of Elevator Repair Service. And sometimes it led us to great discoveries, not always, but it was always a way of working that kept us going. We basically, and in that sort of youthful and contrarian way that we had back then, we wanted to do anything on stage that was not a play. As long as it wasn't arriving to us in a script form, we were interested in it and we wanted to take it on. So I would say at about the 15-year mark, we started to grow up a little bit, and we realized, well, we could do plays. That would be okay. We could still be a respected experimental theater company if we did a play here and there. I mean, some of those plays. Our first one was a Dada play, so you can imagine that didn't, emerge as anything traditional, but that was sort of where we were at. But we started to work. We started to realize that text itself could give us an interesting problem to solve. And about at our midpoint in our career as an ensemble, we started taking on novels, and I think we became best known, and I think Andrew alluded to this, for a production called Gats, which was our way of dealing with the novel as a problem to stage. And we decided that the best thing to do would be to not edit it at all, not cut any words, but do the entire text of The Great Gatsby on stage in one performance. And that was that. And it turns out, thanks. It turns out it takes about 5.5 hours to read The Great Gatsby out loud. You add a couple of intermissions and a dinner break, and you've got an 8-hour marathon performance. So that was a thing that really put us on the map in a big way. And of course, we're very grateful to Andrew and others at the Public Theater at the time for giving us a great platform for that show. So as we were maturing a little bit and figuring out that we could do plays and novels and great literature and great writing as part of what we did, another idea occurred to me. Which was that I had always been, actually partly because of The Great Gatsby and my obsession with the fact that it was under copyright and we couldn't do it for many years because the Fitzgerald estate would not let us. I became very interested in copyright, and that led me to the Supreme Court and a Supreme Court decision, or a Supreme Court case called Eldred v. Ashcroft. And in researching that, trying to figure out just whether or not we could do GATS ever without it being illegal, and we did do it illegally at least once, got in trouble, but it was okay. I became obsessed with the Supreme Court, and I loved, and I discovered a place online where you could listen to the oral arguments that happened, and I thought they were beautiful and amazing, and this incredibly and surprisingly accessible way of learning about the law and learning about the court. And there was a site it's still there, called oyez.org, oyez.org. You can go there and get beautiful descriptions of the cases and listen to the audio. Of course, now since the pandemic, the Supreme Court itself makes the audio available live. So I encourage everyone to listen to the Supreme Court live, which you can do now. But there was a case that I encountered in all of that that I had always been in the back of my mind as this would be an amazing thing to hear on stage. And it was partly about how funny it was. This was, when you listen to those oral arguments, there's an audience, except for briefly during the pandemic, but there's an audience there, and you listen to those recordings, and this case, Barnes versus Glenn Theater, had so many laugh lines, so many times when the audience in the court just like was rolling in the aisles. And I thought, we've got to hear this on stage at some point. And I thought, well, maybe we'll just do a reading of it at some point. But an opportunity came up to actually make a show out of it. And I'll tell you a little bit briefly about Barnes versus Glenn Theater. This was a 1991 case, coincidentally, the year our theater company was founded. And it was a case brought by a group of erotic dancers from South Bend, Indiana. And these were dancers who worked at places that had names like the Kitty Cat Lounge. This was not a high art case. Nevertheless, it was a First Amendment case, and they were challenging, I think it was a local ordinance that banned public nudity. The law said you cannot be nude in public. And they had used this law to shut down some of these clubs where the women in the clubs were dancing completely naked. So it was morality legislation, but as far as the dancers were concerned, this was a First Amendment case. This was their right to express themselves. So the argument in the court, and people are probably familiar with and I meant to look up who said this, which justice, but the old "I know it when I see it" about obscenity. This was an earlier case. This was similarly a case where the Supreme Court was in a very awkward position. This group of mostly older white men, although Sandra Day O'Connor and actually Thurgood Marshall as well were on the court at the time, but this was a very stodgy Supreme Court trying to wrestle with the meaning of dance and whether or not, and the meaning of, and what is, as they often said in the argument, performance dance. So it was full of amazingly hilarious hypotheticals and questions for the advocates. And I always thought it would be great to hear out loud, so we decided to stage it. And I'll show you some pictures from our production. We did a lot of research, and we found that there was a video from C-SPAN of an erotic dancer giving an interview on the sidewalk outside the Supreme Court right after the argument. So we made that part of our show. The rest of the show, we had 3 actors play the justices, and they were on rolling chairs and constantly moving around, switching characters. And because what we had was a transcript and we had audio, we decided to use our imagination for what it might have looked like. So we had a great, Ben Rubin did video design for us, and we had sort of a sort of enormous moving microfiche background that would zoom in on whichever document or case they were referring to. And this was a verbatim performance. The actors were saying exactly what the people in court had said that day. They even at one point quote the Encyclopedia Britannica definition of dance. And you can see they move around a lot. And then by the end, the actor who plays the lawyer for the dancers in our production, this did not happen in the Supreme Court, tears off all his clothes and continues his impassioned argument, at first in a gold thong and then eventually completely nude. So that was our answer to it. But all the while doing the text verbatim. So what I'd like to show you now, and then most importantly for us here tonight, in researching this, we came across an interview with Justice Ginsburg. Now, Justice Ginsburg was not on the court at the time of this case, but she came up in our research, and we found her talking about her robe and her collars, which of course she's famous for. And she told a story in this C-SPAN documentary about how she and Justice O'Connor decided they should wear something different to distinguish themselves from the men. And I won't give away too much because this is the substance of our performance tonight. I'll let Susie Sokol, who plays Justice Ginsburg, tell you the story herself. But it seemed like, and there's also a bit about Justice Rehnquist, who you remember when he was Chief Justice at a certain point started wearing stripes on his on his sleeves, which as a kid, as a younger person learning about the Supreme Court, I thought that's what the Chief Justice always wore, but it turns out it was not. It was Justice Rehnquist's own little quirk. But those two stories seemed like the perfect antidote to the awkward and hilarious discussion that the justices and the advocates had in the case. Because here they are trying to figure out what it means, what someone's clothes mean. Do they express something? If you take your clothes off, does that express something? Is that protected speech? And we found Justice Ginsburg talking about the meaning of what they wore in the court. And it seemed like an especially poignant way to end our performance of this argument. So what I'm going to show you now, just to give you a little bit more of a sense of the show itself, is the trailer that we made. And I'm going to apologize in advance because what I'm going to show you right now is basically an advertisement for the show. And it's full of self-congratulatory press quotes. So maybe it'll make you want to see the show, but you can't now. So, but you can see the final scene, which after I show you our 2-minute trailer, Susie Sokol and Ben Williams from the cast will come out and perform the epilogue. So now I'm going to show you our trailer for Arguendo so you can see what a ridiculous piece of theater it was, and then we'll show you something else.
Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. God save the United States and this honorable court.
Thank you, Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court.
I am a professional entertainer myself, and I perform at a club called Deja Vu in Saginaw, Michigan.
I mean, that's the point. In this question, what is performance dance? What is it?
They have not stopped her from dancing. They have stopped her from going about nude, whether dancing or doing anything else, just as I suppose they have murder laws in Indiana, which prevent people from killing people, whether in the course of dancing or not. Now,
Clever bit of censorship on the part of our video editor there. Good job. So now we will show you what is the epilogue. And no one's going to take their clothes off, so I'm just going to go ahead and disappoint you right now. To Arguendo, performed by Susie Sokol as Justice Ginsburg and Ben Williams as Chief Justice Rehnquist. Here we go, guys.
Now, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
This one, the robe is from England, but the collar is from Cape Town, South Africa. You know, the standard robe is made for a man because it has a place for the shirt to show and the tie. And so Sandra Day O'Connor and I thought it would be appropriate if we included it as part of our robe, something typical of a woman. So I have many, many collars. One day, my dear old chief, who loved Gilbert and Sullivan, appears in the robing room with his new robe, and it has 4 thin gold stripes. People were aghast. Is he trying to show that he is our master sergeant? I laughed because I knew exactly what he had done.
I saw a performance of Gilbert and Sullivan's Iolanthe in which the Chancellor had a whole bunch of stripes. I thought we could do something to kind of make our court more colorful.
It was a low-budget production. And so the Lord Chancellor did not have the brocade gold that the real Lord Chancellor had. In that costume, they were thin gold stripes. And that is exactly what Chief Justice Rehnquist copied.
Thank you. The role of the...
Let me add a P.S.
Please.
Some of the press asked, "Why did you do it?" And his answer was, "I didn't want to be upstaged by the women." This one is one of my favorites.
In other professions in which men engage, said I to myself, said I, the army, the navy, the torch, and the stage. Said I to myself, said I, professional license if carried too far, your chance of promotion will certainly mar, and I fancy the rule might apply to the bar. Said I to myself, said I.
So, Elena, you were commissioned to create a collar for Justice Ginsburg, in addition to the beautiful collar that we have here at the Bard Graduate Center. Can you tell us the story of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess I should start with a little background on how I became a lace maker in 2022. And it's sort of a long story, but I'll try to give you the abbreviated version, which is that I have been a textile person my whole life since I was taught to embroider and crochet as a child. And I studied textile design at FIT, where I specialized in weaving, and I was always sort of searching for lace, but I couldn't, I hadn't seen bobbin or needle lace, which are the techniques primarily represented in the Threads of Power exhibition, and I sort of was searching for it. Eventually, I got a grant to study lace making through FIT in Europe and sort of fell down that rabbit hole for the rest of my life, probably. Previously, I worked in fashion, and I did a lot of custom work, so I did a lot of one-of-a-kind designs. And once I moved into lace making and into working as a historian of textiles, I told myself, I'll never take a lace commission. It's just way too labor intensive. And, I don't think I could manage to make something so time consuming for a custom, piece. But in 2018, it was in the summer, I remember specifically that I was driving to our family's house in Vermont. And I got an email and then a phone call from Columbia Law School saying that they wanted to talk to someone at my Lace Guild, Brooklyn Lace Guild. And I was like, what on earth could a law school want with a lace guild? But I took the call because, of course, I was intrigued. And when they told me that the project was for the 25th anniversary of the investiture of Justice Ginsburg to the Supreme Court to celebrate her, I was like, well, of course, we have to do this. But I didn't think of myself immediately. I sort of shopped it around to different members. And I ended up taking it on. I couldn't say no. And at this point, I had been making lace for bobbin lace for 6 years, but really very seriously for only 3. So this was my first major design project, which was very intimidating, particularly for this purpose. But essentially, this was a concept developed by Cara Van Woerden, who is the creative director at Columbia Law School. She created this logo graphic design of 25s for the celebration that they printed on books and T-shirts. And she initially gave this design to me and asked if I could make it into the lace pattern. But bobbin lace in particular is very difficult to design in. It has a high barrier for entry because unlike embroidery, for example, where you can basically draw something and stitch it onto fabric, bobbin lace is a bit like circuitry, where you have to pre-configure all of the many threads. I think I was using about 100 for this piece, in Egyptian cotton and silk for the outline of the motifs. And basically you have to kind of design in advance where all the threads will travel in order to correctly connect with each other, which is very difficult. And it took me many samples and designs to create it. But eventually, the final collar that I came up with, I proposed several different styles of bobbin lace to them. And this design is in torchon lace, which is a it's a more geometric style of bobbin lace, but that worked very fine for this collar. It's using half stitch for the fillings, and then the background is torchon ground with little picots around the edge, the little loops in silk. And ultimately, including the design process, it took me 300 hours. So I would say about 100 of that was design. And then for the Bard Graduate Center collar that I created was 200. So I've sort of sped up a little bit, but I don't expect to speed up much more than that.
And I encourage you to visit the exhibition to see the time lapse that we have of Elena making this collar. It's 200 hours reduced to 5 minutes, and it still feels impossible. Thank you so much, Elena. Vanessa.
It's a kind of amazing story. So I'm a fashion critic. When most people hear fashion critic, they think that means that I write about runways and I write about designers. But to me, fashion is really about identity and communication. And it is something that everybody practices, right? Every single person in this room, everyone thinks about how they want to present themselves to the world and what they are saying to the world via their clothes about who they are, their community, their value system. And that's really what I write about and what I most like thinking about. But when I do that with people in politics, and particularly women in politics, I have learned that that upsets a lot of people. Because they assume if you're writing about clothes, you are somehow suggesting that the subject is frivolous and superficial and not thinking deeply about stuff. Which is why I think it's so important and so powerful that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was so articulate and deliberate about talking about her dress choices, right? It was incredibly rare, particularly when she first joined the Supreme Court in the early 90s, right? Women did not dress to be feminine. They did not dress to advertise their gender to anybody. But, as the great production showed, and as, the movie On the Basis of Sex showed, who she was integral to how Ruth Bader Ginsburg thought about the world, thought about the law, thought about human rights and the Constitution. And all of that was contained in the symbolism of these collars that she and Sandra Day O'Connor adopted, but that she really took to a whole different level. Because, it was not just about being a woman, it was about her feeling about the law at any particular time. So this is one of her collars that she wore in the Supreme Court class picture. And the fact that this was the favorite collar, it was actually given to her by, it came from Cape Town, that's right. And then...
Do you want me to take it back to this one?
No, I want to go to the majority opinion collar, which was given to her by her law clerks. And she wore whenever she was crafting a majority opinion for the court. And so if she wore it, you knew what was coming. This was the dissent collar, right? It actually came from Banana Republic, was given to her when she won a Glamour Woman of the Year award. And she also wore it, I would like to point out, in 2016 when Trump won the election. And this is a collar from the Met's opera production of Stefania, which you can see at the top, because she was, as we all know, a huge opera fan, and she wore it at Harvard when she got an honorary degree. So every single collar she wore had a connection to her work, to her personal life, and she was very happy to use her clothing as a form of communication. And the fact that, as a justice, she was always wearing these black robes, which were effectively denaturing, right? Like they all sit up there in their black robes, and they all kind of look the same, and they have these little heads on top of them, which, suggest how big their brains are. But really, it's there to kind of wipe out the person. And with these collars, she absolutely centered herself as a person, and humanized, I think, the Supreme Court. And to me, that was really, really extraordinary. And something I think we should applaud and talk about. And the fact that they were made of lace was particularly important because lace is so often associated with femininity, with fragility, with girliness, with all these adjectives that are not considered serious. And it was impossible for anyone to not consider Ruth Bader Ginsburg serious.
Thank you so much.
I've already talked a lot, so all I want to say right now is just to introduce Jacob Climer, who is our costume designer for and maybe let him talk a little bit about the assignment of creating this costume.
Yeah, I mean, it was when designing costumes, you have a ton of restrictions. You have financial, timeline, access, and creating with ERS, you also have a lot of research thrown at you very quickly, which is kind of amazing. For me as a designer, all I want is research. I'm a very research-based designer as well. And they'd sent me the C-SPAN clip when we were talking about this epilogue of the show, and it's the Cape Town collar. It's the beaded collar, which we couldn't do. I just couldn't make that happen, and so then I just started ultimately trying to figure out what was going to emulate it, and the things I always loved about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's collar. She loved a big collar, and it was little bits, these little fragile bits, creating this huge thing, which is also seen, which is also referencing Cleopatra and referencing Queen Elizabeth I. Like there's and armor. It's a feminization of the gorget of the armor, which I just am obsessed with. I'm obsessed that she was, this tiny this woman who wielded the biggest hammer and did it with lace purposefully. It was this act of violent feminism in a way that I wanted to emulate and had to emulate very quickly. This collar this is our second collar, which we might get into in a bit.
Well, yeah.
But it was, some yardage of machine-made lace bought on 38th Street that I sat at 2 a.m. and made into a Ginsburg collar, trying to get things ready for our fittings the next day, I'm sure. So it's just a lot of tiny stitches trying to create a roundness and a lot of starch. But emulating, it fully represents also what we do on stage, which is create falseness, but yeah, that's kind of how we found compelling falseness that emulates the real. So that's the process of just getting that exact collar on stage, I guess.
Thank you. John, you hinted at the story of the life of that collar and why we're looking at the second collar. So could you share that?
So the collar that Susie wore tonight was actually the second one that we called on Jacob to make because oh yeah, there she is. So this is a picture from right after the show when we performed it at Woolly Mammoth Theater in Washington, D.C. In 2014. And we had gotten to know the widow of one of the two lawyers in the case who we were portraying. In fact, she was the widow of the one who, in our production, takes all his clothes off at the end, which took some explaining. Because we had to say, no, we know Bruce didn't do that in this courtroom. But we eventually won her over. And so she organized a night where a lot of Bruce Ennis was the lawyer, and he was a great Supreme Court advocate and ACLU lawyer and First Amendment advocate who argued the case. And she organized a night where all of his former colleagues would come to see our show in Washington, D.C. And these are some of his former colleagues here in the talk back afterwards. But Justice Ginsburg was one of his former colleagues. They had worked together at the ACLU. And she came to the show, and she joined us for the talk back afterwards. Now, she also invited us to come to visit her in chambers after oral argument in a few days later, or maybe a week later, I can't remember. And so we were, there we are. So we said we got to get her a gift. And I don't remember whose idea it was, but we thought the perfect gift would be to give her Susie's costume collar to add to her collection. And we brought it to her after we saw oral argument that day, and then they took us back around to her chambers, and we met her clerks, and then she showed us around her office. I think right there in the previous picture, she's showing us a cookbook that the spouses of the justices had put together for her after her husband died, because he was everyone's favorite chef among the justices' spouses. She was really proud of that. But we gave her the collar. And there she and Susie are after we gave it to her. I'm taking these pictures. I couldn't get my phone to take the right size picture. I was getting so nervous. And like, she was like, come on. She was standing there for like what seemed like an eternity. And there we are, a few of us who managed to make it that day. And then this picture is her wearing the collar that we gave her, the original version that Jacob made. And I ran into her at another event in D.C., a National Constitution Center event where she was speaking. And I went up to her afterwards to say, I didn't know if she'd remember me or if she really was thinking about the show or anything, but I wanted to just thank her again. And before I could say anything, a technician was sort of taking her microphone off of her while she was finishing with this talk. And I said, we just want to thank you again for coming to our show. And she stopped me and she said, I need to send a picture to Susie Sokol because I wore her collar in court the other day, and I want her to see it. So I was just blown away. I mean, she remembered everything. She remembered Susie's name, and she wanted to send her. And so this picture was a picture that her aide took of her and sent it to me, of her wearing Susie's costume before she went into court one day. I don't know. I wish I knew what the case was. I don't know what she heard that day, but there she is. So it was an incredibly special experience that we had and meeting her. And she came back to see us. We performed another show. I mentioned we did a lot of novels. We did an adaptation of The Sun Also Rises, and she came and celebrated her. Thank you. She came and we got one fan in the audience. She came and celebrated, I think, what was either her 84th or 85th birthday. It was her 84th birthday. She came and brought her friend, or her cousins, who were her good friends, and they came to see our show. And I remember we gave her a gift then, too. I think it was just a copy of the book. And
it was a picture of my kids all dressed.
Oh, right. Yeah, Susie teaches second grade at St. Anne's School, and all of her kids made collars, lace collars out of
black glasses.
And they made the collars out of like construction paper.
Yeah.
And we gave her a picture of all of Susie's kids wearing RBG collars. Anyway, it was she was always a bit of a sphinx. We could never tell what she was thinking, but she really honored us by coming and seeing our shows. And according to her, I remember chatting with her security detail,
and them saying like, oh yeah, she goes to see theater like 5 or 6 nights a week.
Thank you. I don't know if any questions have emerged in your minds for each other, but also I would love to open it up in case anyone here in the audience tonight has any questions. The only rule that I have is that when I say questions, I do mean questions. So if you have a comment or a thought, that's why we're going to be drinking wine and beer right out there after the event. But in here, in the spirit of generosity, we ask questions. So yes, please. And actually, we'll have a microphone come right down to you so everyone can hear you.
I don't need it.
Oh, but everyone else does.
Is that done with pins or, whatever you call it?
Oh, how might
How
this
is that
have been
made?
made? Elena, do you know?
I think it's a Mechlin type lace, which is a Flemish lace that can be made with bobbins, similar to the same technique I was using. But it could also be levers, which is a jacquard loom technology. So it's hard to tell without a magnified image exactly the structure, but it is a Flemish style lace. And just on that note, in terms of lace identification, I wanted to point out that earlier when I saw the collar from ERS in person, I realized that it's made of Shifley lace, or chemical lace, which is an embroidered machine lace developed in St. Gallen, Switzerland, that is featured heavily on the 3rd floor of the exhibition. So really, the lace world is very well connected. We always find everything, comes back to itself. So really very cool coincidence.
That's great. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. Question for Vanessa. You recently published, I can't remember if you wrote it or not, sorry, a story about men wearing lace. Could you talk about that in this context?
About men in lace.
Yes, men in lace.
I did not write that one.
Okay, but you published it.
And I think it was really about a fashion trend toward men wearing lace. But I do think it's interesting. In fact, I have a question for Elena, sort of related to that, which is, lace seems incredibly fragile, right? It seems like this kind of ethereal, angelic material. But when you were talking about how you made it, I feel like it also probably is incredibly strong. So, what is the truth about lace?
Well, I will say that great question. And linen lace in particular, which is what traditionally Western European bobbin lace was made from, is incredibly sturdy. And in fact, when I was taking a Valenciennes bobbin lace class in Belgium in 2018, my teacher said, "Oh, Valenciennes which is one of the finest, most sheer and delicate laces you will ever see on the history of the earth." She said, "Oh, it's so strong, you can beat it over a rock." I was like, "What are you talking about?" But it's very densely worked. They're using incredibly fine threads, but they're braided very tightly. So actually, it's meant to be. I mean, it's worn close to your face and close to your body, and it's meant to be laundered and washed and cared for. So it's actually quite sturdy. It's only when we get to the silk laces that they tend to disintegrate a little bit.
I'm just going to add one thing about men in lace. I think, like many items of clothing, whether it's high heels or ruffs or skirts, a lot of what we now consider female clothing actually originated with men. And in fact, if you go back through the history of court dress, if you look at art history, if you look at, European royalty, men wore lace very proudly, and it was not considered particularly girly, if you go back to the sort of Renaissance and beyond.
May I? Sorry, not to dominate the conversation, but it's so true. And in fact, in thinking about Justice Ginsburg and in thinking about the history of lace, which I am so fascinated by, one of the things that I love about it is these dichotomies of wealth disparity, of gender, of all these issues that have changed symbolism over time. So even historically, monarchs like Queen Elizabeth I literally passed sumptuary legislation to be the person who wore the largest lace ruffs in England. I mean, she legislated that she had the biggest ruffs. And this was on purpose to demonstrate her power as a monarch, as a ruler, in a very masculine role traditionally. So how interesting that then, men sort of shed lace in the 19th century, and then by the the period that the collar type that Justice Ginsburg wears, which is very Victorian style, it is totally feminine. And so for her, it's this feminizing symbol, but it's just the way that it's changed meaning over time is so powerful.
I have a question for you guys. Jacob mentioned that that a lot of lace in some ways emulates or has a sort of parallel visual structure to armor or to like chainmail or something like that. And I wondered how if lace is unique in its complexity. I mean, we were looking at things in the exhibition where it was like you can't actually see all the detail here. It's beyond what the human eye can resolve just looking at it without a magnifying glass. And I wonder is that something that's unique to lace?
Well, I might be biased, but I would say that it is spectacularly complex as a former weaver and all of this. But what's also interesting about lace, and we were talking about this yesterday a little bit, maybe you want to talk about the different colors Justice Ginsburg wore, but that lace really is an umbrella category that for all of these different techniques. And although the Bard Graduate Center show focuses on needle and bobbin lace, which are the most traditional Western European styles, there's also many different techniques like tatting and crochet and knotted netting, many of which are very ancient. So, but yes, it is a very complex technique.
And I'll just interject that this Friday we will have a symposium on lace where the full breadth of what is lace is going to be explored. Sorry, Vanessa.
I was going to say, we were talking about the breadth of Justice Ginsburg's collection and the fact that a lot of the collars that we would sort of lump under the category of lace don't look like what anyone would consider traditional lace. Like you could see it in, the majority opinion collar, in her favorite collar. They involve beading. The Banana Republic one looks kind of, actually, I think it looks like they probably considered it a necklace. Yeah. She wore it as a collar, but I think it's interesting how much she expanded or decided that for her, it was an expansive definition. And I think, you certainly see incredible handwork and craft and artisanal techniques, in countries all over the world who create things out of beading or raffia that might be considered lace.
Thank you. Any other questions?
The exhibition and you have spoken about the symbolic meaning of lace historically. Can you riff a bit, no pun intended, on the contemporary meaning of lace? Like, how do you think lace is used symbolically now?
I might have to think about this for a second, actually. But I think, for me, I was similarly drawn to lace sort of as a very gendered symbol of femininity, like Justice Ginsburg, wanting to display her individual identity as a Supreme Court justice. But on a much, much smaller level, I just have been drawn to it personally for many years. I will say that it has become something that is shifting meaning over time again, as fashion is wont to do. So hopefully in the future we will see lace again as a genderless textile, which is what it was originally. But today it is very popular amongst, for example, the Japanese fashion community of Lolitas that I used to be a part of many years ago when I lived in Tokyo. And anyway, so I see it as something that is younger people in particular are really drawn to as sort of because it's so different from the practical sort of everyday clothing that we tend to wear today.
And in December, we'll have an evening with fashion designer Emily Bodie. So some of these questions, if you come back, we'll continue to explore them.
Would you like to add any thoughts?
I think when most people think about lace, they think about things like christening gowns, confirmation dresses. They think about vintage. They think about things that are inherited. They think about doilies, and they think about things that are very precious. And, I think we see that in fashion too, that lace is often used in couture, right? It's something that is really hard to access. It involves handwork as well as machine work. But, the handwork is the kind of most prized, I think, certainly in the fashion community. And I think it will be interesting to see how it develops, because one of the things I love that you said is that it's almost like a like a network, right? That, like, when you think about technology and you think about lace, there are weird connections, and it could actually take us in a whole other place in the future.
I have nothing to add to that. Except to say that listening to all of this, I'll just say again, this exhibition is fantastic that way. And I think, when we saw it the other day, if you know anything or nothing about lace, to get a view of the techniques for making it, to understand why it takes 300 hours to do that, and it makes what you're seeing that much more compelling to understand how much intensely detailed work goes into it, and what a great history it has, and how much what a long history it has, and so I would certainly encourage anybody to go check that out if you haven't already. It's a stunning exhibition. It really is, and it's one of these things where, like, you walk in thinking you know something about this, and then you realize how much you don't know, and come out feeling so enriched by the experience.
I saw another question right back there. Yes.
So I'm wondering, in today's world, if there is one fashion article or embellishment that has the power to communicate a universe of position and importance that lace has had.
I mean, I think that fashion is given its meaning by the people who wear it, and on its own, really, these items, are just empty vessels, and they're waiting to be filled, and we fill them with values and context, and what lace shows is that changes over time, changes depending on who's wearing it and how they're wearing it. So I think it really is up to people in this room.
I wanted to mention something. We were talking the other day about how check. That one of you pointed out that the most recent Supreme Court group photograph revealed that Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan are not wearing collars.
Or Amy Coney Barrett. Right, sorry. I forget about her sometimes.
But it's interesting because now 4 of the 5 justices are women. Of course, I always remember what Justice Ginsburg would say when they would ask her, like, how many women do you think is the right amount for the Supreme Court? And she would go, well, 9. Because why not? There were 9 men for so long. But I wonder what you guys think of that.
In that portrait, though, in the Supreme Court class portrait that just happened, Ketanji Brown Jackson was wearing a lace collar, and it seemed like a direct connection to Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the legacy that she left, really, and what it meant.
Just to jump on and say that also for me, the meaning that lace carries is so deeply connected to the makers, because we have these objects, but we don't have necessarily the names of the makers behind them. But if you really look closely at them and you examine and you think about the labor that went into this, you start to sort of understand these really incredibly skilled invisible women throughout history. So, these powerful men and women of history that were wearing these collars, a symbol of power, we mostly talk about them. We mostly talk about the merchants. We mostly have records of the wares. But so there's an added layer that, the lace community really celebrate, specifically Justice Ginsburg, because we feel seen by her and honored that she acknowledges us. And it's almost a rite of passage for lace makers, or sadly it was, to make a collar for her. So perhaps I can encourage some collar gifting to Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson.
I'm going to take that moment to bring this to a close. I hope that you all will join us out for the wine and beer where you can share your comments, share your appreciation. I will share my appreciation now to this panel and also to Susie and Ben for this evening and to all of you for being here. Thank you so much.